Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. I have a super special guest today. His name is Sameer Patel. He's the Chief Marketing and Solutions Officer for SAP Customer Experience and CRM. That is quite the title, Sameer. So if I got
It's a long
wrong, you can certainly add or subtract whenever we bring you into the feed. So we really look forward to that. Let me bring you to the fore here so we can start our chat. Yeah, so did I get your title right? Maybe
Yeah.
you could translate that into what it is you do in your day-to-day.
I'm happy to. Well, thanks for having me for it. So, SAP, as most people know, we have multiple lines of businesses, right? We have CX, of course, which is where we are today. We have our HR and HXM business. We have our business network and our procurement business, and obviously our ERP business. We're in a bunch of businesses, and we have the way we're set up is we have a chief marketing and solutions officer for each of those lines of businesses, and I have counterparts for chief product officer and chief revenue officer. And so under our purview on the marketing and solutions side, our remit, if you will, is what you would expect off of a CMO function for sure. But in addition to that, also what we call solutions, and that is the growth side of it. How are we thinking about the category for not just now and this year, but for 3 to 5 years? And what are some of the big bets we want to make? And we work obviously very closely hand in hand with our product teams and our revenue teams to sort of bring a business plan together. So that's sort of the coverage in functions. And then within the SAP CX portfolio, we have 5 products. So we have our Salesforce automation, we have our Service Cloud for customer service, we have commerce, we have our marketing business as well, right? And then finally we have our CDC, which is our customer data solutions, right?
Yeah.
Which includes everything from identity to customer data platforms, and all of the core stuff that you'd imagine is underpins the entire stack.
Yeah. Wow. Right. Yeah. Well, I'm a huge fan. I spoke recently with Daniel Smith, the Chief Sustainability Officer, who of course you would know, but just to remind people who are in our audience, and just a global leader in sustainability, and what a wonderful example to set for many of the rest of us. So,
and we'll talk a little about that, and how it matters to CX as well. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. Well, maybe we could start, just because you have such sort of broad exposure to the world of CMO. What are some of the biggest challenges facing CMOs?
I think so let's start with the good news, right? The good news is that, CX is hot as a category, right? So that's the good news, right? I think as organizations move from this notion of CRM, which was really more about the record keeping and the internal efficiency of companies, and kind of evolved to what we call CX today. We've now put the customer's customer at the center of the process as we think about CRM, right? And that's sort of the big shift to CX, where it's not about our internal efficiency as an organization and how we just manage our own operations, but if we had to think about the customer experience driving all the different functions of customer-facing processes inside a company, it's a very different paradigm shift, right? And so it puts the CMO in a very, very important position now, because it is the core of what the business actually does, right? Which is to serve the customer and to drive experience and to keep them happy and delight them. And so that's the good news. Yeah. And I think if you look at statistics across the board, you will see statistics everywhere that talk about, brands that have, there's a bit of, Accenture did some research on this as well, and as have many companies. But when you start to put, CX in and of itself has been able to grow revenue in excess of 26% and reduce costs to the tune of 30% savings when it comes to bringing real hardcore efficiencies to organizations, right? So the role
is quite a number. Yeah.
Yeah, and also the role has become tremendously important. The interesting thing that comes with that is it also puts the role of the CMO in the spotlight, because it's now something that not just the CEO cares about, which the CEO always did, in terms of keeping customers happy, the board cares about. And the growth investments seem to come more and more from what the CMO has in his or her coverage area, if you will, right?
Yeah, so there are sort of two things. I have two threads I
Yeah,
want to pull. So I want to
yeah,
start with one related to that, and then I'll come back to
yeah.
the other one. And there's sometimes the CMO can be sort of, I think, undervalued in the
Hmm.
C-suite. Sort of the CIO or the CTO has the sexier job.
Right.
Sales always gets,
Yeah.
the CSO. Security gets a lot of play these days. So how do you create commitment, alignment, visibility, really, with the CEO and the rest of the C-suite around the importance of the CMO role?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's quite core to how we think about the CMO role at SAP, but also how we think about building products. I love the question, right?
Mhm.
I look at this as an opportunity for for the CX leader, if you will, in an organization, whether that's under the role of a CMO or what have you, to actually be front-footed and be on the offense in this discussion. So it's not just about, hey, how do I catch up because everyone's paying attention to me? It's
Right.
more about how do I help become one of the core levers of the organization to drive both growth and valuation for the company, right? And so that's a different mindset than, oh my God, I'm getting asked all these difficult questions. It's like there's a role for a CX leader to play to try to show how CX will drive growth in different ways. Growth being expand what we're doing, entering new markets in a more effective and efficient way because of the rise of digital technologies. The ability to do a lot of the selling before a seller actually touches something because we're employing digital technologies in a much more data-driven way that can start to drive business, right? So that's I want to answer your question, but I wanted to also say the part that excites me, not
Yeah.
just in my role, but on behalf of the CX leaders that we work with or we sell to or we serve, this is the opportunity for them to to become a driver,
Yeah.
right? As part of the growth of the company. Now, where does that come from, right? Now I can tell you where it doesn't come from, which is where it's come from in the past, which is it is not just about this knee-jerk reaction to just go and invest in point solutions. It's about thinking hard about the center of gravity of the data that allows not just the front office to be more effective in terms of how we delight and engage with customers, but become the core data set that goes deep inside the organization back into the supply chain to give
Sure.
real-time visibility into this is what's selling, this is what's not. Oh my God, we did awesome on a campaign that far exceeded our ability to produce. How do we change where we produce and manufacture and build and
Right.
distribute? There's a very core business objective here, right? That when we, from an SAP standpoint, look at not the traditional stack, if you will, that's considered CX, which is your customer service applications and your commerce applications. But to us, CX is the entire bringing together data across the entire demand and supply chain to be able to do this more effectively versus just looking at data at the edge, right?
Yeah.
And that is our core capability. But I also do think that enterprising CMOs and CX leaders are getting ahead of that.
Yeah.
Right?
That's also a very SAP answer that A, it's all about the customer, and B, that's how we measure ourselves. That's what our metrics are. That's what our success factors are, is
Yeah.
all about this end product with the customer. So the other thread I wanted to pull, Sameer, is just why you think, I mean, clearly CX is getting a lot of play these days, and
Yeah.
deservedly so, as you just said. Why do you think at core there is a disconnect, not so much at SAP maybe, but in general in the world, between customer experience and marketing strategies? Why is CX not already, a good thing? Why are we not having great experiences as customers?
I mean, I think that's a great question, right? So I think if you go back and you look back to that earlier conversation I made around the evolution of CX, right? So there's no shortage of data that says CX is critical and is core and is super important, and customers actually care about it, right? But if you start to really unpack, put a scorecard in place, if you will, of where CX has delivered and where it hasn't in the last 5 years, you start to really see some stark, gaps in terms of where CX is and where it needs to go. And I think this will kickstart the next evolution of CX for the next innings, if you will, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about
yeah,
that, right? How
yeah,
do
let's talk
companies
about
fill
that.
this gap? Yeah.
Yeah. So first things first is let's just establish the gap, right? Or just real quickly, right? So the gap is, when you look at the personalization as an example, right? This was supposed to be one of the big outcomes of CX. Yet you'll find that and we've got we've studied the data on this. NTT did a great research analysis on this that showed that just 10% of personalized interactions have actually been adequate according to customers. Right,
Wow.
so we made all this investment, haven't really been able to move the needle as much as we thought that we could have. Right, look at financial alignment again between what a customer expects and what the brand needs from their own business and the outcomes. Again, you'll find that 3 out of 4 companies cannot effectively relate their financial performance and their CX operations, directly to the investments being made. So, I'll move to the solution, but there are hard facts emerging that we need to get stronger and better at this right now, right? And so I think that the ability for, when we talked about how CMOs and CX leaders get a seat at the table to become real drivers of the business, there are kind of 3 big things that they can grasp and grok immediately to drive change, right? The first is data, like I talked about, right? Is data at the core of how you are making effective decisions to drive intelligent personalization with the customer first, right? And then also informing the back of the supply chain, right? And be able to make the right decisions around production and what the kinds of products and solutions we put. So at a foundational level, the data set that we've looked at as CX leaders today has been a little bit limited to the edge, right? So for example, look at yourself as a consumer, right? Usually the data that exists about Karen is a bit limited to her publicly available breadcrumbs, if you will, right? And then, say something you bought.
Hopefully it's limited to that.
Right, but it's limited
Yes.
to the stuff at the edge, right? Like, what are your customer service interactions? What did you buy? What didn't you buy? But really, the true 360, if you will, of Karen, right, includes other data points like, well, Sameer returns 4 pairs of shoes for every one he keeps. He's not a very profitable customer. Karen is 1-to-1. How are we using data to sell more to Karen and less to Sameer? How are we driving personalization to make sure that my returns are 1 and 2, not 1 and 4? What are your what are your logistics preferences? Like, your experience breaks, not just because you didn't find the right product. It breaks for a number of reasons. Products didn't show up on time, they came late, returns were really difficult. You were promised something and it wasn't in inventory, and you got an email saying, oops, we don't have it. We cannot put that onus on either the brands we deal with, or worse, on their consumers, right? As an industry. Forget SAP, forget everything. As an industry, we have to grow up and actually solve these hard problems first, right? So that's one kind of problem set that we need to show the gap on really quickly. The second one is, at a strategic level, if you're a CEO at the board of a company and you're making big bets on 3 to 5 years, we need to go here, we need to go there. What are the 3-4 levers that CX can pull to help you get there faster? CX is not the only solution, right? There's HR solutions to this, how I staff, how I hire, how I skill, how I produce, who are my partners, is it sustainable? There's a lot of different pieces to that. But CX has some that are clearly ones that we can drive, right, as CX leaders. The first one being, your company says, hey, listen, we've been in manufacturing B2B forever. COVID, for example, forced us to get into direct-to-consumer. Do I have the right technology to pivot that on a dime? Can I move really fast and say I can shore up and spin up a direct-to-consumer model in certain markets? Your board says, I want to enter China and be twice as big as we are. What kind of technology stack and outlay do you require so it doesn't take you 18 to 24 months to just put the tech in place to do that? Have you made the right kind of investments, right? The third is the disconnectivity, if you will, between even sort of the CX stack and the backend stack to really understand who and where are those points of friction between how my customers need to be engaged for me to be able to change those models. As you and I both know, how we engage and deal with customers in certain geographies or certain areas of the world and buy certain products are wildly different.
Yes.
Do I have the toolkit, if you will, to be able to serve the customer on their own terms? That makes the discussion with CMOs, with their boards and with their CEO leaders a lot more real, right? So I mean, I can give you some customer examples if you like. We can talk about it now or later.
I would love to know both a little more about the technology itself, right? Because obviously technology plays a huge role, but to know about the technology and maybe a couple of examples. You know, I think it, you know, the CMO used to be sort of more artist and a little scientist, and now you're like you're data scientist and artist, and I'm sure those vary in terms of their balance over time.
Yeah,
that's so important. But yes, let's talk a little bit about
both
the tech.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think first things first is, you know, again, I think that let's talk about the technology, right? The traditional sort of, and I'll be the first one to admit, you know, vendor driven, right? You know, narrative around CX technologies for the last decade has been a very sort of point siloed application conversation, right? And it's been so rooted in, do I have this feature and do I not have that feature? The break in experience with the end customer and the consumer, or break of that promise you might have made to them from a brand promise, ultimately is just as likely, if not more likely, to break because you have not thought about this as an end-to-end process of looking after that customer, right? So, you know, I can come and sell you a customer service application and you can say, hey, it's got these 17 features and I'm good to go, right? That may be one way to approach it. Or I can have a discussion with you and say, you know, Karen walked into a retailer, her favorite retail department store. She had an issue. She picked up the phone or she tried to call customer service. Well, guess what? Karen might have an issue ranging from, hey, you know, those products that you said were in the store when I called, they weren't in the store. Karen could also have an issue and say, hey, you know what? Your floors were really slippery and I almost fell, right? How do I solve a variety of problems that Karen can have that are not limited to features and functions that are inside a traditionally understood application in customer service, and put Karen at the center of that process and go solve the problem wherever that might be in the organization, right? So when we think about technology, like, listen, there's no question that we have very, very feature-rich and market-leading applications, siloed applications or piecemeal applications to solve problems. But if we want to truly tell, you know, that retailer that we need to put Karen's in the center, she could ask a question about just about anything. Have you got the technology that can actually route those problems to the right place deep inside the organization to solve it for Karen? I can give you similar examples for commerce. I can give you similar examples for SFA, but you get my drift, right? In terms of how we think about it. So that's how, you know, this end-to-end nature of SAP, and we've got case study after case study out of case study of, you know, of how we've been able to solve these problems. In many ways, when I took this job last year, I was like, part of this job is actually to tell untold stories. It's not about just manufacturing new ones, right? And so I think that's one paradigm shift, right, in terms of how we think about the technology. I think the second one is, again, we talked a lot about data, but to solve a lot of these problems, I need to go deep inside the organizations and bring all this data right to the front, to those very people you might be engaging with, or systems you might be engaging with in the CX stack to solve a certain problem, right? So if you're in an e-commerce system, it's just not about telling you about what's in the catalog and what's available, what's not. It's about being able to tell you and give you surety around when can I deliver it, how can I deliver it. By the way, if I don't have exactly what you want, what do you need? That's data coming to the front of the organization. So we think really hard about that, right? And you'll see a ton of more innovation from us on that.
Yes, and we certainly have a lot of personal, all of us do, use cases over the past 2 years of there being a big disconnect between when you thought, especially if you bought any large ticket items over the last couple of years, just huge disconnects. Yeah.
And the last thing I'd like to say, and back to where we started the conversation, right, is that, again, sustainability is a really, really big one that we think super hard about, right? So sustainability, the interesting thing about sustainability is most of the goodness and the not so goodness that happens when it comes to sustainability, again, if you put on a myopic view of what are traditionally called CX technologies, they don't get solved there. They don't. You know, issues around sustainability and solving for those issues are deep inside the supply chain, and those are as much CX problems because of choices someone made about the kind of percentage of cotton they use in the product a year or two before it actually showed up on the shelves, right? And so we think really hard about how do we on one hand, be able to help our customers who are doing a ton around sustainability, bring that information to the forefront so Karen can make a choice and say 2 pairs of white shoes, this is how this was, manufactured. I want to go with this one. So making that easy for you to do that. The second is helping our customers in their own operations be able to figure out how are they using materials, information, recycled goods, and how they're taking that and putting it back into the supply chain, right? So to me, those are, look, we can sit here and I can give you a full feature-rich analysis of how we're good in the stack. We are, right? Where we shine and the way we think about it is, can we truly put Karen in the center of that experience better than any other software provider on behalf of our brands? And we keep innovating to do that. So that's kind of the technology discussion, right?
And the market is telling you that you're being successful at that, right?
100%, right?
100%. And I love this. It's this next step, next level. How do I make the customer more successful with their purpose? Right. I hear that from big consulting companies like Genpact, right? That's what they have reorganized themselves around is purpose. CMO is also the chief purpose officer, internal and external, right? So here, if you need to add more to your title, you can lobby for being chief purpose officer as well. But that's embedded at SAP, and
100%, right?
It is maybe 100% of, or at least 50% of why you're being uber successful. So it's great.
Yeah, and I think that's how that I know our chief product officer thinks really deeply about these things that I just mentioned about. As she thinks about the choices she makes, right, in terms of where we invest and how we think. So there's what I talked about here is rooted in product truth. It's not just aspirational going forward, right? So your second question was customers, right? And I think again when I talked about helping CMOs, like you asked, right? Like how do they get a seat at the table? How are they becoming drivers of the business, right? So we look at success in different ways, but one of the success criteria here is have our customers been able to be CX customers show quantifiable results back to their customers, right? So one of my favorite examples, by the way, which gets me huge brownie points with my kids because it's a very
we're all for kid brownie points.
Hey, we all are, right? Is Ferrera, right? Which is a customer of ours, candy maker, sweet tarts, nerds, Laffy Taffy brands that we all sort of know, many of us know and grown up with. I mean, here's a great example of a customer that is harnessing the value of its data to improve customer experience, right? So they had direct to consumer ambitions, and they had an older stack as they were trying to move it direct to consumer, and by using working with us to put data and intelligence at the core of their transformation in terms of how they deal with customers across any channel. Here's a brand that saw 59% increase in contactable customers, 20% increase in open rates for their campaigns, right? 3x more digital registrations than the average for sweepstakes. These are very hard financial metrics and growth metrics that you can take to a board conversation and say that CX isn't just about the soft programmatic metrics that we might have been about in the past around, like, the softer stuff, right? Like, the engage and the likes and the NPS scores. We do all that. We're great at that. But let's show you how we're actually the top end, or the net, if you will, and adding surgical precision because it's data driven in terms of how we bring return on marketing investment, right? So that's one of the great sort of like B2C brands, right? And we have a ton of them, right? And our customers look at these sorts of metrics to show tangible value from CX.
Yeah, not just what you did for your stack, your function, but what you did for others, both your internal customers as well as your external customers.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely. And now we have SAP, as you know, has a we've got a huge pedigree and history in B2B as well, right? Like we've been doing that for a very long time. And here's another one that I love, right? This is it's in Australia. This is they manufacture water heaters, right? They've been doing it since 1939, right? Provide, products for millions of homes. They sell it through merchants, if you will, right? Who then sell it out to sort of plumbers and dealers, right? Here's another great example of a company that, looked at experience from an end-to-end standpoint, right? So they decided to sort of enhance both their direct and indirect consumer experiences by using these technologies as a single source of truth for customer interactions. Again, data at the core of it. Any different touch point, it's a sale touch point, a service touch point, there should be no difference in the data that you have to be able to talk to these customers. So they invested heavily in making sure that they had real-time information at every stage of the sales cycle, the after-sales cycle, the service cycle, And as a result, these guys saw they reduced their cost by 41% and they increased revenue by 11%, right? So when you take both those two things here, you can, again, CX leaders can up-level the discussion,
Yes.
if you will.
Yeah.
From, what did we do at that programmatic level because I met my KPIs and I got my bonus, to we drove valuation and we drove the business forward, right? And the enterprising CMOs and CX leaders of today are so ready to rise up to that challenge. And that's kind of what excites me when we talk to our customers. They are ready to do this and they're ready to take on those big business challenges versus looking at website hits and the other sort of programmatic things.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you for those clear examples. Definitely things that would get the attention of both the CEO and the board. I have one last question for you, Sameer. I know our time is getting a little short. And that is, the tagline for my consulting business is up and to the right, because that's the spot on the 2x. Actually, I have to do it this way when we're on the video. That's the spot on the 2x2 matrix where we always want to be, is in that upper right hand. You have a very successful career and more to come, I'm sure. But was there a moment when you knew, or an event, a seminal event, when you knew that your career was moving up and to the right?
Oh, good question. I mean, I think, my wife will tell you that, like, I'm, every time I made changes in career, right, like it's always been about shoring up an untold story, or it's always been about something that looks a little more like an underdog and needs to be, it's not one of those things which is just running and you're kind of moving that direction. I don't know if there's a seminal point, but I will say that there's a gradual, I've always gravitated towards businesses like this where there's a fantastic story to be told. There may be some work left, right, in terms of building products with there. That's okay. But there is a very clear, unique value proposition which lines up with where the puck is going to be.
Yeah.
And if there's something that I found that has, continued to let me be in the upper to the right, is being surrounded by incredible partners, leaders, stakeholders, and, fellow colleagues, where we can come together and we can take something that looks like, can get in the front of the parade, right? Because we have a very, very compelling technology stack and people and incredible talent in the building, where we can just, all we need to do is get focused on the 2-3 things that we need to solve for. And there's a playbook around that. And I've been successful in my career, knock on wood, to be able to sort of repeat that playbook over and over again, right?
Yeah.
And I think that when I look at where we are as a business and why I got excited to take this on last year when I took the role, is all these things held very true to me in terms of why SAP can be a formidable player in this category.
Yeah.
And I'm surrounded by an incredible, CRO in terms of Jen Balin, who runs sales, and then Ritu Bhargav, who runs product, where I think we are, we're pretty tied to the hip on understanding where does this market need to go, where does SAP have an unfair advantage, and we work every day to drive our teams to, not forget that end goal, right? I think to me that is the up to the right strategy.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you so much, Sameer.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it, and we'll look forward to connecting again sometime in the future.
Sounds awesome. Well, thanks for having me. All right, take care.